If this story hits you somewhere, real, stay until the very end. Drop a comment telling me what state you were watching from. I want to see how far this reaches. The night started the way every bad night does, quietly, with a door swinging open. Marlo Ashford heard them before she saw them. The laughter came first. That particular kind of loud that doesn't care who's listening because the people making it have never once had to care. Four of them. Young, expensive sneakers. The kind of sunburn you only get in Vegas when you've been poolside for 3 days straight on someone else's tab. They pushed through the glass door of the Desert Rose Diner like they owned the air inside it. And maybe in their minds they did. Highway 50 40 miles outside Ely, Nevada wasn't the kind of place people ended up on purpose. It was the kind of place you passed through or got stuck in, or like Marlo never quite managed to leave. The Desert Rose sat off the highway like a building that had been meaning to fall down for 20 years and kept forgetting to. Cracked vinyl booths, a jukebox that hadn't worked since 2011, fluorescent lights that buzzed just loud enough to make you feel slightly insane after a 6-hour shift. Marlo had been on her feet since 10 that morning. It was now almost 11 at night. She carried 3 plates in her left arm and a coffee pot in her right hand when she first noticed them sliding into the big center booth. The one she always hoped the rowdy ones would avoid because it sat right in the middle of everything. She noticed the way the other diners already started shrinking in their seats. The older couple near the window angled away. The trucker at the counter pulled his cap lower. Her co-worker, Dana, 22 and 3 months pregnant, took one look at the 4 men and suddenly found something very important to do behind the counter. Marlo set the plates down at table 6, refilled the coffee at table 2, and walked toward the center booth with her order pad. "Evening," she said, voice even. "Can I get you guys started with something to drink?" The one closest to the aisle looked up at her slowly. Blonde, square-jawed, the kind of handsome that had probably gotten him out of consequences his entire life. He let his eyes travel up and down her in a way that was slow enough to be deliberate, in public enough to be a statement. "Yeah," he said, "you can get me your number." His friends laughed. Marlo kept her smile exactly where it was and didn't move a single muscle in her face that she didn't choose to move. She'd been doing this since she was 19. You learned how to hold a smile like armor. "Pepsi lemonade," she said. "We've got sweet tea tonight. I'm serious." He leaned forward. "Preston Langford. My dad owns Pinnacle Casino on the Strip. You've heard of it." "I'll give you all a minute," Marlo said. She turned to walk away. His hand caught her wrist. Not hard, not yet, just enough to stop her, just enough to make the point. "I wasn't done talking." The diner went the specific kind of quiet that doesn't mean silence. It means everyone heard and everyone made the exact same split-second decision about what they were going to do about it, which was nothing. Marlo could feel it, the way you feel a room shift, like oxygen being slowly pulled out. She looked down at his hand on her wrist. Then she looked at him. "Let go," she said. She said it quietly. She said it like she meant it. He let go, but he smiled when he did it, which was worse. That smile that said, "I let go because I decided to, not because you asked me to." There's a difference and we both know it. She took their drink orders and walked back to the counter without looking back at them. Dana appeared at her elbow instantly. "You want me to call Bobby?" Bobby was the night manager who was also at that moment 40 minutes away at his kid's baseball game. "I'm fine," Marlo said. "I'm fine, Dana. They're just drunk." Dana looked toward the booth and then back at Marlo with the expression of someone who knew the difference between drunk and dangerous and wasn't sure Marlo was being honest with herself. Marlo wasn't being honest with herself. She refilled the water glasses at table 4 and tried to calculate the way she did every night without meaning to, how much she'd made in tips so far, whether it would cover the copay for Finn's treatment next week, whether the late notice on the electric bill could survive another 5 days. Her brother was 16 and needed a medication that cost $400 a month. Their mother had been gone for 3 years. Cancer. Their father gone longer than that. 7 years. It was just Marlo and Finn and the Desert Rose Diner and the highway stretching dark in both directions outside the window. She couldn't afford a bad night. She couldn't afford to lose this job. She kept moving. In the far corner booth, a man sat alone with a cup of black coffee and a plate of food he hadn't touched. He was somewhere in his late 40s, though he carried the particular weathering of a man who'd lived hard enough to look older than he was. Gray threading through dark hair, hands resting on the table that looked like they'd done serious work for serious years. He wore a leather vest, dark worn smooth at the shoulders, over a plain black shirt, and there was a small iron vulture stitched above his left chest pocket. He wasn't reading anything. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was just watching the room the way certain men watch rooms. Not casually, not obviously, but steadily. Taking everything in the way you do when paying attention to your surroundings isn't a habit, but an instinct burned in so deep it runs on its own. His name was Callahan Thorne. Nobody at the Desert Rose knew that yet. The two older bikers at the counter knew. They'd come in with him, and they sat with their coffee and kept their own eyes level and their voices low, because when Callahan Thorne was in a room, you felt the silence he was choosing to keep. Cal had been riding through, that was all. 3 days in from Colorado, heading toward nothing in particular, the way he'd been heading for 7 years. He stopped here because the diner had a light on, and he was tired of the dark. He'd been watching Preston Langford since the moment the four of them walked in. Not because he was looking for trouble. Cal had spent years running from the version of himself that looked for trouble. He watched because that's what he did. And because something about the way that young man moved through the room, like the walls themselves owed him, made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up in a particular way. He picked up his coffee cup and drank, and waited. The first real escalation happened 40 minutes in. Preston had been drinking steadily, and his volume had been climbing in slow increments, like a dial being turned up by degrees. His friends fed off it. Every time Marlo came back to their table to refill drinks or clear plates, the comments got a little bit closer, a little louder, designed not just to make her feel small, but to make sure everyone in the diner heard it happening. You always work doubles or just when you need the attention. Smile more. You got a pretty face when you're not scowling. What time do you get off? I'll wait. Marlo said nothing each time. She did her job. She kept her smile calibrated to exactly the temperature of professional courtesy and nothing beyond it. But her hands. Dana noticed this. Her hands had gotten very still. Not the relaxed stillness of someone who's calm, the stillness of someone holding themselves together by force. Dana came to the counter and said quietly, "Marley, I want you to let me take that table." "No," Marlo said. "No, Dana, you're pregnant. I'm not putting you in front of that." "Then let's call Bobby." And what does Bobby do? Ask them to settle down, and they laugh in his face and keep going. And then they leave a $5 tip, and I spend the next hour talking to the county sheriff who's going to ask me what I was wearing. She grabbed her order pad. "I've been through this before. I know how it ends. You stay behind the counter." She was wrong about how it ended. 9:47 in the evening. Marlo was carrying a dessert order to table 6 when Preston called out to her across the diner. "Hey, Marlo." He'd read her name tag. That was new. "Come here a second." She finished delivering the plate. She smoothed her apron. She walked over. "What can I get for you?" "Your number," he said, same as before. But the smile was different now. Drunker. Harder. Something mean underneath it that the earlier version had kept better hidden. "I don't give out my personal number," Marlo said. "Is there anything else?" "Why not?" He spread his hands like the question was genuinely puzzling to him. "You work for tips, right?" "I tip well. Real well. My old man gives me $2,000 a week spending money, and I haven't touched half of it." He pulled out his wallet and slapped $400 in cash on the table. $400, just for the number. The diner was very quiet. Marlo stared at the money. $400. $400 was exactly what Finn's medication cost next month. Her throat tightened. She looked at Preston Langford's face and understood with absolute clarity that he knew exactly what he was doing. He'd looked at her. The worn shoes, the double shift exhaustion, the diner that barely scraped by, and he'd calculated it. This wasn't attraction. This was a demonstration. He was showing her and showing everyone in that room that everything had a price and that he could afford whatever price it took to make a woman like Marlo do what a man like him wanted. Keep your money, she said. Something shifted in his face. Excuse me, keep your money, sir. Is there anything else I can get for you tonight? She turned to walk away. That was when he grabbed her apron. The yank was sudden and hard, pulling her backward and off balance. She gasped, couldn't help it, and grabbed the edge of the nearest table to keep from falling. His friends were already on their phones, laughing, filming. Hey, he said, I wasn't done. Let go of me. Her voice came out sharper this time, cutting through the silence of the diner. Let go right now. He yanked harder. The apron string snapped, and in the half second before Marlo understood what was happening, Preston's hands found the sides of her uniform skirt. The cheapest fabric, because she'd bought the cheapest one, and he pulled. The tear was loud. It sounded like something breaking that wasn't supposed to break. Marlo went down, to the floor, both hands grabbing at herself, at the ruined fabric that wasn't covering anything the way it should anymore. And the room was full of laughter. Preston's friends laughing, filming, two of them already typing captions, and the rest of the diner was frozen. 40 people, 40 people in that diner, phones out, not just Preston's friends, 3 other people, recording, some of them laughing, some of them smirking, most of them just watching. And Preston Langford stood over her and smirked. That particular smirk, the one that says, I can do whatever I want and nobody's going to stop me, and we all know it. And Dana cried out from behind the counter, and nobody moved, and the lights buzzed, and Marlo was on the floor of the Desert Rose Diner at 9:48 in the evening on a Tuesday in July, trying to hold herself together with her own 2 hands. And in the far corner booth, a coffee cup was set down on a table. Very quietly, the sound was almost nothing. But it stopped time, because the men who knew that sound, the men who knew the name Callahan Thorne, they knew exactly what came next. And it wasn't mercy. Cal was on his feet before he'd made a decision to stand. That was how it always worked for him. His body moved first, and then the reasoning caught up. 30 years of training, 12 of combat, 7 of trying to unlearn all of it, and still the body knew. He walked across the diner, not fast, not slow. The bikers at the counter, his men didn't move. They watched him. They knew better than to move when Cal walked like that. They'd seen that walk before, a long time ago, in a very different place. Preston and his friends were still laughing when Cal reached the booth. He stopped 3 feet away. He didn't say anything, just stood there. Preston looked up. The way you look up at something when your brain hasn't told your face to be scared yet, but something deeper in you already got the message. The laughter stopped. Not all at once. In pieces, friend by friend, until Preston was the last one still smiling. And then he stopped too. Who are you? Preston said. Cal's voice, when it came, was very quiet. Right now, I'm the only thing standing between you and the worst decision you ever made in your life. He let that sit for a half second. Look at her. Preston's eyes didn't move. Look at her, still quiet, still the same voice. Look at what you just did. Preston's jaw moved. Something defensive was loading up behind his eyes. She's a waitress, man. You were just going to look down at that woman on the floor and understand what you are right now. Cal didn't raise his voice by a single degree. And then you're going to stand up and you're going to walk over there and you're going to apologize to her out loud in front of every person in this room who watched you do it and didn't do a damn thing to stop you. A pause. And then you're going to pay for every bit of damage you caused, and you're going to leave. A long silence. Then Preston laughed. It was the wrong move. Old man, do you have any idea who my father is? Cal tilted his head slightly. The way a man does when a question doesn't require an answer because the answer doesn't matter. One of Preston's friends stood up, the biggest one, the one who'd been doing the most filming. He was 6'2" easy with the broad chest of someone who'd spent a lot of time in campus weight rooms. He stepped forward and put a hand on Cal's shoulder. He had the hand on Cal's shoulder for approximately 1 second. That was as long as it lasted. What happened next was not the kind of thing that looks impressive in the movies, because in the movies it's always slow enough to watch. This was not slow. There was a shift of weight and a precise rotation, and the big friend was bent face forward over the edge of the booth table, making a sound that wasn't language. And Cal was still standing in exactly the same place he'd been standing, voice exactly as quiet as it had been. Anybody else? Nobody else. The second friend was already backing toward the wall. The third had his hands up. Preston looked at Cal with something new on his face now. A calculation going on behind his eyes. A rapid reassessment. He was drunk, but he wasn't stupid. And whatever signal Callahan Thorne put out when he stood in a room, even drunk and arrogant, and 23 years old, some part of Preston Langford received it clearly. "This is assault," Preston said. "That's for lawyers," Cal said. "Right now, I'm just a man asking you to do the right thing. Last time I'm asking." Something moved across Preston's face. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was something older and buried deeper than that. Some small surviving piece of the person he might have been if his father had raised him differently. He stood up from the booth. His face was red. His hands were shaking slightly. He walked to where Marlo still sat on the floor. He didn't crouch down. He couldn't quite manage that, but he stopped in front of her. He started. "Say it right," Cal said from behind him. Preston exhaled through his nose, looked at the floor, then at her. "I'm sorry," he said. Quiet, real, the first real thing he had said all night. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." He stopped, couldn't finish it. Marlo looked up at him from the floor with red eyes and said nothing. She didn't need to say anything. Preston peeled cash from his wallet, everything in it, which turned out to be close to $900, and set it on the nearest table without being asked. Then he walked to the door. His friends followed. Not one of them said a word. The door swung shut behind them. Cal looked around the diner. Every face, every person who had sat frozen while it happened. He didn't say anything to them either. He turned back and crouched down beside Marlo and said very quietly, "You need help getting up." Marlo looked at him for a moment. Her jaw was tight. Her hands were still pressed to what was left of her skirt, and her eyes were bright with the particular kind of tears that come not from sadness, but from rage you've held too long in a body too small to hold it. "I've got it," she said. She started to stand. Her knee buckled. Cal caught her arm without hesitation and helped her the rest of the way to her feet. Dana was already coming around the counter with a spare apron from the back, already wrapping it around Marlo's waist, already talking in a low, steady voice. Marlo led her. She stood very straight and looked at a fixed point on the far wall and breathed. Cal stepped back. He turned toward his corner booth, picked up his jacket from the seat. "Sir," Marlo's voice. He turned. "What's your name?" He looked at her. She was still shaking slightly. She was still holding herself together with everything she had. And she was looking at him the way people look at you when they mean the question. Not as small talk, not as courtesy, but because it matters. "Thorne," he said. "Callahan Thorne." She nodded once, like she was filing it somewhere important. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne." He nodded back. He paid his bill. Cash, exact change plus 40%, and walked out into the dark Nevada night. He thought that was the end of it. He was wrong. The video was everywhere by morning, not the film Preston's friends had taken. They deleted that fast enough. But the diner had security cameras. And the footage of what Preston Langford did to Marlo Ashford, followed by what Callahan Thorne did to Preston Langford, had been uploaded to 3 different platforms before midnight by someone who'd been sitting in the diner and decided that this particular thing was worth putting into the world. 50,000 views by 2 in the morning, 400,000 by sunrise. By 9 in the morning, Marlo Ashford's name was in headlines she'd never asked for. And Callahan Thorne's face, partially visible, partially obscured by the angle, was the subject of every comment thread imaginable. Marlo didn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table in the small house she rented on the edge of town with Finn asleep in the back room, and the glow of her phone lighting up without stopping, and tried to calculate what any of this meant for her. She wanted to feel something clean, vindicated maybe, or grateful. Instead, she felt a heaviness she couldn't name, the particular dread of a person who knows that when things go viral, the attention doesn't choose sides neatly. It just descends on everyone without mercy. Her phone rang at 8:43 in the morning. The number was from her second job, the insurance office where she worked 3 mornings a week doing filing and data entry. Marlo, it was her supervisor, Jim Hatfield. Thin voice. Too careful. I'm going to need you to come in today. I need to talk to you about, I'm scheduled for Thursday, Jim. I know, but something's come up. Today, if you can, she knew before she walked through the door. He let her go with phrases like optics and the nature of our client relationships, and we have to think about how this looks for the office. He couldn't look at her directly when he said it. At least he had the decency to be ashamed of himself, even if it didn't change anything. Marlo walked back to her car in the parking lot and sat there for 4 minutes with her hands on the steering wheel. Then she started the car and drove. She didn't know yet who had called Jim Hatfield. She didn't know yet that by noon her landlord would be texting her about a property inspection, the third in 2 months, always finding new problems, always implying something about her lease renewal without quite saying it out loud. She didn't know yet that the dark blue sedan parked across from her house when she got home that evening was not a neighbor's. She found the note tucked under her windshield wiper when she came out of the grocery store. Not a parking ticket, not a flyer, a folded piece of paper with her name written on it, in ink, her full name, Marlo Grace Ashford, which meant whoever left it knew her middle name, which was not on anything public. She stood in the parking lot and unfolded it. 3 sentences, printed, not handwritten, no signature. Stop talking to media. What happened at the diner was nothing. What can happen to your brother is not nothing. Marlo read it twice. Then she looked up and looked around the parking lot slowly. The way you look when you know someone's been watching you and might still be. A handful of cars, a woman loading groceries, an older man walking a small dog at the far end. Nobody watching, nobody obvious. She got in her car and locked the door and sat there for a full minute before her hands started shaking. She hadn't spoken to any media. She'd turned down 2 interview requests that morning. She'd posted nothing. She had been so specifically carefully quiet that the shaking in her hands now was partly from the note and partly from something older and deeper. The rage of a woman who has done everything right and still ended up here. What can happen to your brother is not nothing. She pulled out her phone and called the one number she could think of. It rang 4 times, yellow. Deacon's voice. Gruff, flat, unhurried. This is Marlo Ashford. From the diner. She kept her voice steady through effort. Dana gave me your number. She said Cal gave it to her last night in case a pause. She heard wind on the highway, the sound of motorcycles in the background. He figured you might call, Deacon said. Where are you? Parking lot of Ridley's on Main. I got a note on my car. She read it to him verbatim. Silence on his end, long enough that she wondered if he'd put the phone down. Don't go home, Deacon said. What? Don't go home right now. Is your brother at school? Yes, leave him there for now. He's safer in a building with people than at home. Drive it to the diner. Stay inside. Stay where staff can see you. Cal's 20 minutes out. Cal's coming back. Another pause. He never really left, Deacon said, and hung up. Cal was already off the highway when Deacon relayed the call. He'd spent the night at a roadside motel 6 miles east of Ely, telling himself he was just resting before the ride back to Colorado, knowing the whole time he wasn't going anywhere. 7 years of being a ghost had taught him that you could lie to yourself about almost anything except the things that mattered. And something about the previous night mattered in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. He didn't examine it, he just stayed. When he walked into the Desert Rose 40 minutes later, Marlo was sitting in a back booth with a coffee she wasn't drinking. And Dana was behind the counter watching the door with her arms crossed, like she intended to personally obstruct anyone who came through it wrong. Marlo looked up when Cal came in. She pushed the folded note across the table without saying anything. He read it standing, then he sat down across from her. "Tell me about your father," he said. Marlo blinked. "My Victor Langford has been acquiring land on this highway for 10 years, Cal said. This diner property is one of the last holdouts. That's not a coincidence, but it's also not the whole story. The note mentions your brother. That means they've already looked into you, which means they found something worth looking for." He looked at her steadily. "Your last name is Ashford. Where's your father?" Marlo's jaw tightened. "He's dead," she said, 7 years ago. "What did he do?" She was quiet for a moment. The buzzing fluorescent light filled the silence between them. "He was a journalist," she said finally. "Investigative reporter. He worked for the Nevada Tribune for 15 years. He covered corruption, land fraud, organized crime." She looked at the table. "He quit 8 years ago. We never really understood why. He said it was for stability, for the family, better hours. He took a job doing freelance copy editing. Paid the bills, but it wasn't the same." She shook her head. "He was different after. Quieter. He started keeping things locked up. Files, boxes. He had this whole section of his closet that he kept padlocked." Her voice dropped. "We thought he was maybe having some kind of breakdown. My mom tried to talk to him about it, and he told her to stay out of his office. That was the only time I ever heard him raise his voice at her. How did he die?" She met his eyes. "Car accident," she said. "Hit and run. The driver was never found. A beat. The police said it was a drunk driver. On a Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon on a road he'd driven 1,000 times." She picked up her coffee cup, put it down without drinking. "I never believed it. But I was 17 and Finn was 9 and my mother was already sick and I didn't have the time or the money or the..." She stopped again. "I didn't have anything left to fight with." The diner was quiet around them. Cal was very still. "The locked closet," he said, "after he died. What happened to his things?" Marlo frowned. "We moved out of the house about 8 months after. Most of his stuff went into storage." She paused. "Some boxes I kept. I never really went through them. I kept meaning to, but..." She stopped. A different look crossed her face. "They're in Finn's room. He kept them because he wanted something of Dad's. I told him when he was older we'd go through them together." Cal looked at her for a moment. "You need to go through them today," he said. Marlo stared at him. "Right now," she said, "you think there's something in my dead father's boxes that has to do with Victor Langford. I think your father worked as a journalist covering powerful men." And then he stopped. "And then he died. I think someone left a note on your car that mentioned your brother's safety less than 18 hours after Preston Langford embarrassed himself in front of 40 witnesses and a security camera." He leaned forward slightly. "And I think you're smart enough to know that that's not a coincidence. You've known it since you read that note in the parking lot." Marlo looked at him for a long time. "Why are you doing this?" she said. "You don't know me. You stopped in here for coffee." Cal didn't answer right away. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but full. A man deciding how honest to be, and then deciding to be honest. "Someone important to me once found out something about a powerful man," he said, "and she didn't have anyone standing beside her when things went wrong." He looked at his hands on the table. "I am not going to watch that happen again." Marlo held his gaze. She didn't ask who he meant. She understood somehow in the way that people understand things that are too large and too raw to be explained quickly, that the answer to that question was the kind of thing that happened to a person once and left a mark that nothing ever fully covered. Okay, she said. She picked up her keys. I'll get the boxes. Finn was 16 and he had his father's eyes and his mother's stubbornness and the particular exhaustion of a teenager who has been through more loss than teenagers are built to carry. When Marlo called the school and told them she needed to come get him early due to a family matter, he met her at the front entrance with his backpack half zipped and a look on his face that said he'd already seen the video online and had been waiting for the other shoe to drop. How bad, he said, getting in the car. Still figuring that out, Marlo said. Who's the old guy on the motorcycle in the parking lot? Marlo glanced in the rearview mirror. Cal had followed her from the diner at a distance. Not close enough to crowd, close enough to be there. He helped me last night, she said. Finn looked in the mirror himself, studied Cal's face for a moment through the rear window with the flat, careful assessment of a kid who'd learned young to read strangers. He looks like he's seen some stuff, Finn said. Yeah, Marlo said. He has. She drove home. The blue sedan was not outside when they pulled up. But Cal spent 30 seconds scanning both directions of the street before he followed them inside. And Marlo noticed. The boxes were in Finn's closet. 3 of them. Cardboard. Sealed with tape that had yellowed over 7 years. Marlo stood in front of them for a moment with Cal beside her and Finn in the doorway and felt the specific weight of a thing she'd been avoiding because some part of her had known or feared that the answers inside were the kind that don't make grief easier. They make it more complicated. She opened the first box. Tax files, client folders, organized the way her father organized everything. Precisely, alphabetically, with colored tabs, nothing immediately obvious. She moved to the second box, more folders, older. The third box was different, heavier, not files. A laptop, older, and the screen cracked at one corner. A small fireproof document sleeve, zipped and locked with a combination. And underneath everything, a sealed envelope, white, her name written in her father's hand, to Marlo, open on your 25th birthday. Marlo stared at it. She was 24. Her birthday was June, still 11 months away. Cal, she said quietly, there's a letter. She didn't wait for permission. She tore it open. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her father's tight script. The letter was dated August 2018, 1 week before he died. My dearest Marlo, if you're reading this, I failed. I had everything to stop Langford. Documents, recordings, witnesses. But I was too afraid. Afraid they had hurt you, your mother, Finn. I chose silence over justice. I chose my family's safety over the truth. But you, my brave girl, you're stronger than I ever was. You've always asked the hard questions. You've never looked away from injustice. The truth is in this box. Finish what I started. Tell the story I was too afraid to tell. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough. Your father, Gideon Ashford. June 2018. Marlo's hand shook. Finn made a sound from the doorway. Not quite a sob. He knew, Finn said. He knew he was going to die. Marlo folded the letter carefully, set it on top of the notebook. And when she reached for the composition notebook underneath, she did it with a different weight in her chest. Wrapped in a plastic bag sealed with tape and 2 rubber bands, a composition notebook. The black and white speckled kind. The kind you buy at a drugstore for $1. The handwriting was her father's. She recognized it instantly. The tight, precise lettering of a man who wrote like he was filling out forms even in his personal notes. She turned to the first page. A date, 8 years ago, and a name. Pinnacle Hospitality Group. Victor Langford. Offshore transaction records. She turned another page, then another. Her father's handwriting filled every page. Numbers, dates, account codes, names of companies she didn't recognize, names of people she did, a county commissioner, a state senator, a federal judge who had been in the news 2 years ago for some kind of ruling favorable to casino development interests, And near the middle of the notebook, a section her father had underlined twice and starred in the margin. A different list, smaller, harder to read, like he'd written it fast. Property acquisitions, Highway 50, 2017 to 2022. Methods, intimidation, code violations, planted inspections, insurance fraud. And one confirmed arson. Marlo stopped reading. She looked up at Cal. He was reading over her shoulder, and his face had gone very still. There's more, he said, quietly. He pointed to a line lower on the page. She looked. Her father had written 3 initials and circled them. E.T. Journalist. Cal went completely motionless. Marlo looked at him. E.T., she said carefully. Do you know Eleanor Thorne, he said. His voice barely made it out. She was good. She was the best person I ever knew. Marlo's father had known. He had documented it. He had kept it hidden and locked away, and ultimately died on a Tuesday afternoon on a road he had driven 1,000 times. And Cal's wife had died in a fire that the report called undetermined cause. And both of them had been looking at the same thing from different angles. An empire built on documents that were not supposed to exist anymore, except they did exist. They were sitting in a composition notebook, in a cardboard box, in a 16-year-old boy's closet, in a rented house on the edge of Ely, Nevada. My dad knew, Marlo said. The words came out strange, hollow. He knew what happened to your family, and he kept it. And then she couldn't finish the sentence. He was protecting you, Cal said. His voice was under tight control. Every word deliberate. He knew what publishing it would cost him. He saw what it cost Eleanor. He stopped, recalibrated. He kept it safe instead of public. And then he died. Cal looked at the box, the notebook, the locked document sleeve. And Langford doesn't know this exists. He knows your father kept records. That's probably been in the back of his mind for 7 years. But after last night, after the video, he started looking at you more carefully. And eventually someone's going to start looking at the right things. Finn had been standing in the doorway through all of it. Marlo had almost forgotten he was there until he said quietly, "So what do we do?" Marlo looked at her brother, at the notebook in her hands, at the man standing in her dead father's things with the name of his dead wife written in her dead father's handwriting. And something that had been trembling inside her chest for the last 12 hours settled into something harder and colder and more determined. "We don't run," she said. She said it the same way she'd said, "Let go" to Preston Langford the night before. Quiet, real, like she'd already decided and the words were just the announcement. Cal looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, something shifted behind his eyes that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite calculation. Something that recognized what it was looking at. "No," he said, "we don't run." The Iron Vultures compound sat 40 miles east of Ely on a stretch of desert road that didn't appear on most maps and wasn't meant to. It was the kind of place that existed because the men who built it needed somewhere the world couldn't easily follow them. Not because they were hiding, but because they'd each spent enough of their lives in places where someone else controlled the exits. And they were done with that. Marlo had been afraid of it when Cal first suggested they move there. She'd imagined something from a movie, something dark and loud and populated by men who looked through you while they talked to you. She'd sat in Cal's truck with Finn in the 3 cardboard boxes and her brother's medication bag in the back seat, and she'd gripped the door handle the whole way without realizing it. What she found instead was 12 men who ranged in age from 40 to 68, who had between them 4 Purple Hearts, 2 Silver Stars, a kidney transplant, 1 divorce so recent the papers were still in someone's glove compartment, and a combined total of 19 years in various VA waiting rooms that had never adequately served them. What she found was a hand-lettered sign above the garage bay door that said, "You're safe here," in faded red paint. What she found was a woman named Carla, Deacon's wife, 60-something, silver-haired, with the calm authority of someone who had handled every kind of emergency and found none of them as bad as people expected. She took one look at Marlo and Finn and said, "Kitchen's in the back. I made chili. Sit down before you fall down." Finn ate 2 bowls. Marlo sat at the table and spread her father's notebook open in front of her and didn't eat anything. Cal stood at the far end of the table with Deacon and 2 other senior members. Bull, who was built like the name suggested and said almost nothing, and a man called Priest, who had actually been a chaplain in the Army and now handled what the club quietly referred to as their community operations. The 4 of them went through the notebook page by page, and the room got quieter as they went. He documented everything Priest said finally. He had a voice like the bottom of a well, low, measured, shaped by years of delivering news that couldn't be softened. Account transfers, property transactions, bribery payments. In this section here, he turned the notebook toward Cal, pointing to a page near the end. He's got a timeline. Highway 50 land acquisitions cross-referenced with county code violation filings. Insurance claims, 3 separate incidents he marked as arson. And then he stopped. Cal looked at the page. There it was, his wife's initials again, E.T. and a date, the date of the fire. And beside it in Gideon Ashford's hand, confirmed, not accidental. Source B. Who is B, Marlo? Marlo asked from the other end of the table. Nobody answered immediately. Then Cal said very quietly, "Briggs." Deacon looked at him sharply. "The same Briggs who's been doing Langford's ground operations for the last decade," Cal said. "He used to be a cop. Lost his badge in 2014 for evidence tampering. Langford hired him the same year." He looked at the notebook. "Your father had a source inside Langford's operation. Someone who fed him information. Someone with the initial B." He looked at Marlo. "Your father didn't just keep records. He was actively building a case." Marlo pressed her hands flat on the table. "He never said a word to us," she said. The anger in her voice was the kind that comes from grief and feels almost identical to it from the outside. He carried all of this and he never said one word. "He was trying to protect you," Carla said from the kitchen doorway. Gentle, direct, the way women say the hard things when the men are still processing. "He's dead," Marlo said. "Yes," Carla said. "He is. And you're not. And now you've got what he kept." She nodded at the notebook. "So the question isn't why he didn't tell you. The question is what you do with it." The room held that sentence for a moment. Finn looked up from his bowl. The 16-year-old with his father's eyes, sitting straight, chin level. The way boys sit when they decide to be older than they are and mean it. "She's right," he said. Everyone looked at him. "Dad died to keep that safe," Finn said. "It should mean something." The plan they assembled over the next 2 hours was not elegant. It was the kind of plan that comes together when you have partial information, limited time, and the specific kind of problem-solving skill that emerges from people who have operated in conditions where the margin for error was zero and the consequences of failure were measured in lives. Cal had spent 12 years in that environment. So had Bull. So in different ways had most of the men in that garage. The notebook needed to be copied, and the copies needed to go to people who could not be pressured into destroying them. The locked document sleeve, which Cal's contact in Reno, a former FBI analyst named Torres, confirmed, likely contained digital backups on a small drive, needed to be opened without destroying whatever was inside. Marlo needed to be somewhere Langford's people couldn't get to her while they worked. And Finn needed to stay close, visible, and safe, because the note on her car had mentioned him by implication. And that was not a detail Cal was willing to treat as empty. What they didn't know, what they had no way of knowing at 7 in the evening on a Wednesday in a compound 40 miles from anywhere, was that the plan had already been partially compromised. It happened the way betrayals usually happen. Not dramatically, not loudly. It happened in a bathroom with a cheap second phone that nobody knew existed. In a text message sent in under 30 seconds. The member's name was Cole Brennan, 29 years old, prospect for 8 months, patched in 6 months ago. the youngest member by a decade. He was standing in the hallway outside the meeting room when Cal outlined the timeline, and he had debts that had nothing to do with the Iron Vultures and everything to do with a gambling problem he'd managed to hide. Because the people who noticed things in the club were watching for the kind of trouble that came from outside, not the kind that lived quietly in a man's own chest. Briggs had found him 3 weeks ago. The approach had been soft, almost friendly. Just information, Briggs said. Just general information. Nothing that would hurt anyone. And the money enough to clear what Cole owed, and then some had appeared in his account the same day. He told himself it wouldn't matter. He told himself that again now, staring at his phone in the bathroom, and didn't believe it any more than he had the first time. He sent the text anyway. They have documents. Ashford girl has notebook. Moving to compound. Thorn running protection. He put the phone back in his sock. He walked back into the hallway. He almost ran directly into Marlo, who was coming out of the kitchen with a glass of water. She looked at him. He looked at her. Sorry, he said. Didn't see you. Marlo looked at him for a half-second longer than the moment required. Something registered in her face. Something that wasn't recognition exactly. More like the peripheral awareness of a woman who had learned to read micro-expressions from years of working in rooms where she needed to know who meant her harm before they acted on it. It's okay, she said, and kept walking, but she glanced back once. Torres arrived at this compound at 11 that night with a toolkit in the quiet confidence of someone who had opened harder things in a Ziploc sleeve in worse conditions than this. He had the drive out and readable within 40 minutes. He plugged it into an air-gapped laptop he'd brought himself and pulled up the contents. Your father was thorough, Torres said to Marlo, who was sitting beside him watching the screen. He was a journalist, she said, before he became an accountant. Torres looked at her, then back at the screen. He was more than that. Torres scrolled slowly. This is 9 years of documentation, transaction records, scanned originals, correspondence. He's got emails between Langford and 3 different state officials about zoning exemptions bought and paid for. He's got wire transfer records to offshore accounts in the Caymans. He stopped scrolling. Wait, there's something else first. He clicked on another file. Video, dash cam footage. The timestamp read August 15th, 2018, 2:14 p.m. Highway 50. The view from inside Gideon Ashford's car, his hands on the wheel, the road ahead empty, then in the rearview mirror, a black SUV, accelerating. It happened fast. The SUV rammed the back of the car, once, twice, a third time harder, pushing Gideon's vehicle toward the shoulder. The camera caught it all. The license plate visible for 3 frames, the deliberate swerve, the impact that sent the car spinning. The video cut to black. Marlo's coffee cup hit the floor. Didn't break, just rolled. They told us it was a drunk driver, she said. Her voice didn't sound like her voice. They said he probably didn't suffer. Torres pulled up another screen. DMV records, the plate he said, registered to a shell corporation, Langford Holdings subsidiary. Finn stood up so fast his chair fell over. They killed him, Finn said. They murdered our father and we believe them. The room held that for 10 seconds. Nobody moved. Then Torres said quietly, there's also a recorded phone call, 6 minutes. Recorded 2 months before the dash cam footage. Play it, Cal said. Torres looked at Marlo first. She nodded. The audio was 6 minutes long. The quality was good, a professional recording, not a phone propped against something. Her father's voice, controlled, careful. And across from him, a voice that Cal recognized from the news coverage he'd watched that morning. Victor Langford, smooth, reasonable. The voice of a man who believes he is always the most intelligent person in any room he inhabits. You know what you have is incomplete, Langford said on the recording. You know that anything you think you can prove, I can counter. I have lawyers, Gideon. You have a mortgage. Her father's voice said, I have everything, Victor. All of it. I've been keeping it for 2 years. A pause. What do you want? I want to give it to someone I trust and walk away, her father said. I want to disappear from your life and you from mine. I want my family left alone. Another pause. Longer. You should have come to me sooner, Langford said, and the conversation ended. 3 months after that recording was made, Gideon Ashford died on a Tuesday afternoon on a road he'd driven 1,000 times. Marlo was not crying. Her face had gone the particular still of a person receiving information that confirms what they have always suspected but never wanted to confirm. The grief in the room was not loud. It was the heaviest possible kind, quiet, in total, and very old. Finn, who had come in halfway through the recording, sat with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. He tried to make a deal, Finn said, muffled. He tried to walk away, Marlo said. He thought it would protect us. It didn't. No, she said, it didn't. She looked at Cal. Langford has never faced a consequence in his life, she said. Not one real consequence, not even close. Cal held her gaze. He will, he said. How? Her voice was not pleading. It was a genuine tactical question from a woman who had been running on adrenaline and grief for 36 hours and needed to understand the actual shape of what came next. He owns lawyers, he owns politicians. We have a notebook and a drive and a recording that his lawyers will spend 6 months arguing the providence of while he moves his money and destroys anything we missed. We don't go to his lawyers, Cal said. We don't go to the local sheriff who cashed his checks for 15 years. We go direct. He looked at Torres. You still have the contact at the FBI field office in Las Vegas. Torres nodded slowly. Connolly. She's been building a financial crimes case for 2 years. She's been missing the source material. He looked at the laptop screen. This is the source material. Can you get it to her tonight? I can call her tonight. Then call her. Torres was already reaching for his phone when Carla appeared in the doorway. Not urgently, but with a particular quality of presence she had when something required immediate attention. Cal, she said, you need to come outside. The pickup truck had been parked at the end of the access road for 40 minutes before Bull noticed it. No plates visible from the compound. Removed or covered. Impossible to tell in the dark. No movement. Just sitting there with its lights off. Engine running. Cal stood outside with Bull and Deacon and looked at it. Could be nothing, Deacon said. He said it without inflection, which meant he didn't believe it. How many, Cal asked? At least 2 in the truck. Maybe more behind it. Hard to see the ridge from here. Bull said nothing. He was looking in the other direction, toward the east side of the property where the terrain dropped off toward a shallow wash. His head tilted slightly in the way it did when he was hearing something the others weren't. Second vehicle, Bull said quietly. East side. Came in quiet. They're boxing us, Deacon said. Cal turned and went back inside. He didn't run. Running communicated panic and panic spread. He walked with purpose, and the men who saw him read his face and straightened, and the room shifted in temperature the way rooms do when the people in them understand simultaneously that something has changed. We've got company, Cal said. 2 approaches, east and west. Torres, pull everything off that laptop and onto the drive and get the drive to Marlo right now. He looked at Carla. Take her and Finn to the back room. The one with the second exit. Go. He looked at the rest of his men. Nobody does anything until I know who this is and what they want. We are not starting anything, but we finish it if we have to. Marlo heard him from the hallway. She came through the door fast. Finn, Carla has him, Cal said. Go with her. I'm not hiding in a back room while I'm not asking you to hide. I'm asking you to survive. He said it straight. No softening, no apology. The drive goes with you. If this goes wrong, you run for the east exit and you keep running. There's a town 2 miles that direction. You call Torres' number. You keep that drive away from these people no matter what. Marlo looked at him. The sound of gravel crunching outside reached them. Closer now. Go, he said. She went. Cal turned to his men and something came back into his body that hadn't been there in 7 years. Not anger, not fear, but the cold and total readiness of a man returning to the one thing he was built for and had been trying to walk away from and could not. Bull, he said. East side, take two. Deacon, you're with me. Everyone else holds position inside until we know what we're dealing with. He was already moving. What happened in the next 8 minutes would not be simple to explain later and would not be reported accurately by anyone. It would become the subject of two separate legal proceedings in one federal investigation and a local news segment that got most of the details wrong. But the essential facts were these. The men who came for the Iron Vultures compound that night were not police. They carried weapons they had no legal right to carry in the state of Nevada. And they came with a specific coordinated approach of professionals who had been briefed on the layout and expected limited resistance. They had been told correctly the number of people inside. They had been told incorrectly that Callahan Thorne was just a biker who got lucky in a diner. The fight lasted under 4 minutes. 3 of Langford's men ended up with injuries serious enough to require hospitalization. One Iron Vultures member, a 61-year-old veteran named Hatch, who moved faster than men half his age when he took a hit to the shoulder that broke his collarbone and knocked him down. And he got back up cursing with one arm and kept going. And nobody who saw it would forget it. Cal himself encountered the man directing the operation at the east entrance. A broad, gray-haired man with the former cop bearing of someone who'd operated in the space between legal and not for a long time and had grown comfortable there. They looked at each other. Briggs Cal said. The man stopped. Something moved across Briggs's face. Recognition. And under it, not guilt exactly, but the awareness of a debt that had been accumulating for a long time and had now arrived in the form of the man standing in front of him. Thorne, he said. The fire, Cal said. 7 years ago. You were there, not a question. Briggs's jaw moved. His hand was still at his side, not reaching for anything. Not yet. Just standing. Just breathing. I followed orders, he said. The phrase landed in the air between them like something physical. You followed orders, Cal said. I didn't know. They told me the house was empty. My daughter was 6 years old, Cal said. Silence, the kind of silence that has weight. Briggs took a breath. His hand moved. Not toward a weapon, toward his phone. Langford gave the order, he said. I can give you everything. Every detail. Everything I know. I've got records of my own. I kept them because I knew someday, he swallowed. I knew someday something like this would happen, and I needed something to protect myself. Cal looked at him for a long moment. The thing in his chest that had been burning for 7 years was not gone. It would never be entirely gone, but it moved differently now. Moved towards something instead of consuming him from inside. You give it all to the FBI, Cal said. Tonight. Not tomorrow. Not through a lawyer. Tonight. He held Briggs's gaze. And you tell them everything about my wife, about Ashford, about every piece of land and every bribe and every name on that list. Briggs nodded once, slowly. The nod of a man who has been carrying something terrible for 7 years and has just been given a door to put it down even if the door costs him everything. Tonight, he said. Inside the compound, Torres was already on the phone with Agent Rachel Connolly in Las Vegas. In the back room, Marlo sat with the drive in her hands and Finn beside her, and Carla's steady presence filling the space between them and the dark outside. And she listened to the sounds of the compound settling back to quiet and understood with the clarity that only comes after the worst moment passes that the worst moment had not come yet, because Victor Langford had not called Briggs back. And when powerful men don't hear back from the people they sent to solve a problem, they stop waiting and solve it themselves. And Victor Langford, 63 years old, worth $400 million untouched for 30 years, had just enough pride left to want to look the Ashford woman in the eye before this was finished, which meant he was already on his way, and nobody in that compound knew it yet. Torres hung up the phone at 12:47 in the morning, and the look on his face told Cal everything before he said a word. Connolly's moving tonight, Torres said. She's been building toward this for 2 years, and the recording alone is enough to get her a federal warrant. She wants the drive, and Briggs in a room in the next 6 hours? He paused. She said to tell you don't do anything that makes her job harder. Tell her I'm trying, Cal said. He walked down the hallway to the back room. He knocked twice before opening the door, a detail that cost him half a second and that he did deliberately because the woman on the other side of it had spent enough of the last 2 days having people move through her life without asking. Marlo was sitting on the edge of a cot with the drive in her hand and Finn asleep beside her, his head on a folded jacket, his breathing the slow and total unconsciousness of a teenager who has finally run out of adrenaline. Carla was in the corner chair with her eyes open. She didn't really sleep when there was a situation. Cal knew. He'd seen her do this before. She just waited, steady and alert, like a lighthouse. Connolly is in, Cal said quietly, keeping his voice below the threshold of waking Finn. 6 hours and this starts moving through federal channels. Once it's in that system, Langford can't touch it. Marlo looked at the drive. 6 hours, she said. She handed him the drive. He looked at it. Small thing, smaller than his thumb, carrying 9 years of a dead man's courage. My father had this for 7 years, she said. He died for it, and it sat in a cardboard box, and none of it meant anything. It means something now, Cal said. It means something if we get it to Connolly. She looked at him. Who else knows we're here? The question landed in the silence of the room with more weight than she'd intended it to carry. And Cal felt the answer arrive in his gut a half second before it reached his conscious mind. That particular drop of certainty that comes from experience. From years of operating in conditions where the wrong answer to that question got people killed. He kept his face even. Get some rest, he said. I'll be outside. He walked back into the main room and found Deacon standing apart from the others, with his arms crossed and a look on his face that Cal recognized from 15 years of reading that face in difficult situations. Cole, Deacon said, one word, just the name. Cal said nothing. I went back through the timeline, Deacon said. Low. The truck was positioned outside 18 minutes after you laid out the plan. Not 20, not 30, 18. Nobody outside this compound knew the plan before you described it. And Cole was in the hallway. He looked at Cal. He's in the garage right now. Volunteered for watch duty 20 minutes ago. Very eager to be helpful all of a sudden. Cal inhaled through his nose. Exhaled. Where's his phone? That's the thing, Deacon said. He's only got one on him, but a man with a debt habit and a paymaster tends to carry two. Cal crossed the main room and went into the garage. Cole was sitting on an overturned crate near the side door. And the specific quality of his stillness when he heard footsteps too rigid, the stillness of a man who has been practicing looking casual and can't quite make it natural, told Cal what he needed to know before he said a word. Cole looked up. His face did the thing faces do when the body understands it's been seen. Hey, Cole said. Cal stopped in front of him. He didn't raise his voice. He rarely did. But there was something in the way he occupied the space directly in front of a person when he looked at them. A totality of attention that left nowhere to hide. Tell me now, Cal said. All of it. Right now. Because what happens next depends entirely on whether I hear it from you first. Cole lasted 6 seconds. Then he broke. Fast. The way people break when they have been holding something alone and someone with enough authority finally gives them permission to put it down. The debts, the approach, Briggs, the text, the money, 3 weeks of it. All of it coming out in a low, rapid, miserable recitation while Cal stood there and listened without interrupting. When Cole finished, the garage was very quiet. What did you tell them tonight, Cal asked. Specifically, what did the last text say? Cole swallowed. That you had documents, that the Ashford girl had a notebook, that you were running protection at the compound. He paused. I didn't tell them about Torres. I didn't know about Connolly. I swear to God, I didn't know they were going to send people, but you knew something would happen. Cole's jaw worked. I told myself it would just be information, he said. I told myself they just wanted to know where she was and then they'd leave it alone. And you believe that it wasn't a question. It was the saddest possible version of a statement. I needed to believe it, Cole said. Cal looked at him for a long moment, long enough for Cole to fully understand the dimension of what he'd done. Then Cal said, "Get up. You're going to sit in the main room where Deacon can see you, and you're going to stay there until the federal agents arrive, and then you're going to tell them everything you just told me." Cal. "You're lucky Hatch is still breathing," Cal said. "That's the only reason this conversation is still civil." "Get up." Cole got up. Cal walked him to the main room and handed him to Deacon with a look. He turned to head back when he saw Finn hunched over a laptop in the corner, the kid's fingers moving fast across the keyboard. A look of intense concentration on his face that Cal recognized from men half his age doing work 3 times as complex. "What are you doing?" Cal asked. Finn didn't look up. His voice was quiet, certain. "Dad taught me to code when I was 10. He said technology was the weapon of my generation. I thought if I could get into Langford's email, maybe there's something else. Something Torres didn't find on the drive." Cal crossed the room, looked at the screen, lines of code, a login interface, then access. Finn scrolled through emails, stopped on one dated 3 days ago. Subject line, "Carter case dismissal, final payment." He clicked it open. An email from Victor Langford to someone listed as MT, Margaret Townsend, the federal judge from Gideon's notes. Wire transfer confirmation, $200,000. Memo line, consultation fees for property dispute resolution. Finn looked up at Cal, his eyes bright, fierce. This is from last week. He's still doing it, even after the video, even after everything. He took a screenshot, backed out, cleared his tracks. "I learned to do this because Dad said knowledge was power," Finn said. "I'm using it the way he would have wanted." Cal put a hand on the kid's shoulder. Just for a second. Then he found Torres. "The kid just hacked Langford's email," Cal said. "You need to see this." Torres pulled up the screenshot on his phone, whistled low. "This is active corruption, current. Connolly can add this to the warrant." He looked at Finn with something like respect. "How old are you?" 16, Finn said. Torres shook his head. "Your father would be proud." And then he went to find Bull. The information Cole sent was general enough that Langford's people knew we were here, but not everything we had, Cal said. Which means Langford knows the first approach failed, which means he's making a different decision right now. He looked at Bull. "If you were Victor Langford and you just sent 6 men at a target and it went wrong, what's your next move?" Bull thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. "I'd stop sending other people," Bull said. Cal nodded. "That's what I think too." He said, "Get everyone on full watch, all approaches. Nobody comes in or out without—" The sound reached them before the sentence finished, not from outside, from down the hall, a door opening. And then Carla's voice, raised, which was alarming because Carla did not raise her voice for small things. Cal was already moving. He got to the hallway in 4 seconds. The backroom door was open. Carla stood in the doorway with both hands pressed to the sides of her face. And the room behind her had Finn sitting upright on the cot, wide awake, eyes wild. And the cot next to him was empty. The window was open. The drive was gone. Marlowe. It had happened in the 8 minutes between Cal leaving the room and Cole's confession in the garage. 8 minutes. The man who came through the window was not one of the 6 from earlier. He was quieter, better, a different category of operative. The kind that costs significantly more and is used for significantly more specific purposes. He had come in on foot from a direction nobody was watching because everyone was watching the directions from which the previous threat had come, which was exactly the reasoning behind sending him from a different direction. Marlowe had not screamed when he put his hand over her mouth. She'd fought, hard, efficiently, with the specific determination of someone who had already decided tonight was not the night she stopped. But he was trained for this, and she wasn't, and she had no weapon, and it was over before Finn was fully awake. Finn had seen his sister pulled through the window before he could move. That was the thing about the night that Finn would carry for a long time afterward. Not fear, not helplessness, but the specific anguish of having been there and not been fast enough. He was on his feet and at the window in seconds. And then he stood there screaming his sister's name into the dark Nevada desert and getting nothing back. Cal arrived 20 seconds after Finn started screaming. He stood at the window and looked out and calculated the direction and the timing and knew with the practiced precision of a man who had spent his adult life reconstructing scenarios from evidence exactly how this had happened and approximately how much of a head start they had. 2 minutes, maybe 3. They had one vehicle unaccounted for, the vehicle that had approached from the east before the fight, which had retreated when Bull's group moved on it and had not been found since. "They're not taking her to Vegas," Cal said. He was talking to Deacon, but also to himself, running the map in his head. Too far, too exposed. There's only one property on this highway that Langford controls large enough to hold someone and keep it quiet. He looked at Deacon. The development site, the old Haverson property, 18 miles west. He bought it 2 years ago and the permits have been stalled. Nothing's been built, but there are structures. "You're sure?" No, Cal said. "But I'm moving anyway." He turned. Finn was standing directly behind him, not crying, not shaking, standing the way he'd been sitting at the table earlier, straight, chin up, the weight of an adult decision sitting on a 16-year-old's frame. "I'm coming," Finn said. "You're not," Cal said. "She's my sister, and she would not forgive me if I took you into that." Cal looked at him directly, the same way he looked at Preston Langford in the diner 2 nights ago. Total attention, no space for argument. "Your job right now is the most important job here. Torres needs a witness who can testify to everything that happened in this compound tonight. Every detail. You were here for all of it. That means you stay. You talk to Torres, and you tell Agent Connolly everything you saw and heard when she arrives. That's how you help Marlowe." He held the young man's gaze. "That's how you finish what your father started." Finn's jaw worked. His eyes were very bright. He nodded once, the same way Marlowe had nodded at the diner when she filed Cal's name away somewhere important. Cal was already at the door. The ride out was dark and fast, 4 bikes running without headlights for the first mile to avoid giving away the approach. Then lights on as they hit the highway and opened everything up. Cal in front, Deacon to his left, Bull and Priest behind. 4 men on desert asphalt at 1:30 in the morning, riding towards something they couldn't fully see, which was not a situation any of them were unfamiliar with. Cal rode and thought about Marlowe. He thought about her on the floor of the diner, holding herself together. He thought about her hands on her father's notebook, turning pages with the controlled, careful movements of someone absorbing damage without letting it show. He thought about the way she'd said, "We don't run," not bravely, not dramatically, just as plain fact, the way people state things that are simply true. He thought about Eleanor. He always thought about Eleanor. The guilt of it was different tonight than it had been for 7 years. Usually it sat on him like something he deserved. Tonight it felt not lighter but differently shaped, like it had become something else. Not absolution, nothing that clean, but purpose. The kind that comes from the specific understanding that the past cannot be undone. But the present right now on this highway at this speed, the present was still happening and still mattered, and he was still here and still moving. He pushed the throttle harder. Victor Langford was not what Marlowe expected. She'd built an image of him over the last 48 hours, from the footage and the reports in her father's notes. And the image was of a man who looked like power, imposing, loud in some refined way. The kind of person who fills a room by design. The man sitting across from her in the prefab office of the Haverson development site was 63, medium height, slightly soft in the way of men who haven't needed physical strength for 30 years. He was dressed neatly, even at this hour. Pressed shirt, watch that cost more than most people's cars. He held a glass of water and he looked at her with the alert, evaluating expression of someone conducting a business meeting. That was the thing that made her skin crawl. He wasn't angry. He wasn't theatrical. He was just assessing. "You're Gideon Ashford's daughter," he said. It wasn't a question. Marlowe's wrists were zip-tied in front of her. She sat straight in the chair and looked at him and didn't answer. He was a good man, Langford said. Meticulous, honest, which is not always an asset in the industry. He turned the glass slowly. He made the mistake that careful people sometimes make. He assumed that documentation was the same thing as power. He was right, Marlowe said. Langford smiled, patient, the smile of a man who has heard arguments before and found them uncompelling. "Your father had 9 years of records, and he's been dead for 7 years. Nothing happened." "Because nobody knew where to look," Marlowe said. "Now they do." Something moved in his face. Not concerned, not quite. More like the recalibration of a chess player who has seen an unexpected move and is deciding how to respond. "Where's the drive?" he said. "Not here. Where is it?" "With someone you can't reach." She held his gaze. "It's already moving. You're already too late. You just don't know it yet." He stood up and walked to the window and looked out at the dark desert for a moment. And Marlowe used those 3 seconds. She had the phone before he turned around. Not hers. Hers was gone. This was a phone belonging to the woman who had brought her a bottle of water 20 minutes ago. One of Langford's people. A younger woman, mid-20s name tag said Gina, who'd left it on the table near Marlowe's chair and hadn't noticed when Marlowe worked it off the table surface with her zip-tied hands in the dark, while everyone was looking at Langford. Marlowe had looked at Gina's face when she set down the bottle and seen something there that wasn't entirely absent of conscience and had made a calculated decision based on that look. She had 1 bar of signal. She opened the camera, switched to video, hit the button that she knew from years of watching Dana go live for birthday parties and baby showers would broadcast directly to the internet. She set the phone on her knee. Screen up, facing Langford. "Why Highway 50, she said loudly enough to pull him back from the window. He turned, he looked at her, and then because powerful men who have operated without consequence for 30 years have a fundamental inability to resist explaining themselves to people they believe cannot use the explanation against them, he talked. He talked about the corridor, the casino development, the luxury resort strip he had been planning for a decade, running 40 miles along Highway 50, requiring the removal of every working-class business and home currently sitting on the land he had been quietly acquiring. He talked about it the way people talk about vision, with the serene confidence of someone who has already decided that what they want is equivalent to what should happen, and that people who stand in the way of it are simply misunderstanding history. He mentioned the families who'd been pushed out. He mentioned with the particular phrasing of a man who considers this category of action simply practical, the ones who hadn't left voluntarily. He mentioned the fire that cleared the old Callaway property in 2019. He mentioned with the same flat practicality that there had been other fires. Marlowe kept her face still. The phone on her knee kept recording. 1 bar of signal was enough for a live stream if the stream was low resolution. She didn't know if anyone was watching. She didn't know if the signal was holding. She didn't know if Gina had noticed the phone was missing or if the woman who'd looked at her with something like conscience had made a different decision in the last 10 minutes. She knew Langford was still talking, so she kept him talking. The journalist Marlowe said, 7 years ago, Eleanor Thorne, the room temperature changed. Langford looked at her differently now, the assessment sharpening into something else. That was not my intention, he said carefully. But it happened. There are situations that develop in ways that aren't. She had a 6-year-old daughter, Marlowe said. Her name was Ivy. Silence. The first real silence of the conversation. Langford looked at her with something that might on a better man have been shame, and on him was only the recognition of a liability. "Who else knows you're here?" he said. The door opened. Not Langford's people. Cal. He came through the door the same way he'd crossed the diner floor. Without theater. without a word, with the total and undivided purpose of a man who has located the thing he came for and is now simply closing the distance. Two of Langford's men moved. Bull and Priest, coming through behind Cal, handled both of them before they cleared their holsters, and the sounds that followed were brief and conclusive and left both men on the floor without being dead, which Cal had specifically requested on the ride over. Langford took 3 steps backward. He hit the wall. He looked at Callahan Thorne, the man whose family he had destroyed and whose name he had looked up and read about 48 hours ago in a security file. And for the first time in 30 years, Victor Langford felt the specific cold of a man who has run out of space between himself and a consequence. "Wait," Langford said. Cal reached him. He didn't hit him. He didn't need to. He took Langford by the collar of that pressed shirt, and he held him there against the wall, and he looked at him from a distance of 8 inches and said nothing. Just looked. The way you look at something when you've been carrying it for 7 years. "Your wife," Langford started. "Don't," Cal said. I don't want anything from you," Cal said. "I want you to still be breathing when the federal agents get here. That's the only thing I want from you right now. And I need you to understand how much effort that is costing me." Langford stopped talking. Cal stepped back. He crossed to Marlowe and pulled a folding knife from his pocket and cut the zip tie in one clean motion and held her arms steady as she stood, because she'd been sitting rigid for over an hour and her legs were uncertain under her. She held up the phone, still recording, 1 bar, still live. "How long?" Cal asked. 11 minutes, she said. He stared at the phone, then at her. "You got him on camera," he said. Not a question. "He likes explaining himself," she said. The sound of vehicles reached them. Multiple. Coming fast from the highway, not motorcycles. Engines that belonged to large vehicles moving with authority. Deacon appeared in the doorway. "Connolly," he said, "4 federal vehicles." She must have been already heading this direction when Torres called. Torres appeared behind him. He looked at Marlowe. He looked at the phone. He looked at the live stream counter in the corner of the screen. The number of current viewers climbing steadily, already past 80,000. And his expression was one of a man who has been in this work long enough and to recognize a moment when it happens. "That's going to be on every news station in the country by morning," he said. "Good," Marlowe said. Outside, the vehicle stopped. Doors open. Agent Rachel Connolly's voice clear, sharp, carrying the particular authority of someone who has been building toward this moment for 2 years and arrived to find it already halfway done, cut through the desert night. "Federal agents. Nobody moves." Marlowe finally exhaled. The phone was still in her hand. The stream was still running. And across the internet, in the middle of the night, 80,000 people were watching a 63-year-old billionaire standing against a wall in the Nevada desert. His pressed shirt slightly wrinkled for the first time in 30 years. Looking at a 24-year-old waitress with zip tie marks on her wrists and her dead father's drive in her pocket. And somewhere in that 80,000 people in living rooms and kitchens and hospitals and all-night diners across the country, the viewers who watched saw something in Marlowe Ashford's face in that moment that they recognized, even if they couldn't have named it. The look of a person who has been afraid for a very long time and has finally completely stopped. Cal stood beside her. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. And in the corner of the room, Victor Langford looked at the phone in Marlowe's hand and understood for the first time in 30 years that the thing he feared most had finally found him. Not justice, not the law, the truth, told by the daughter of the man he'd killed to keep it quiet, traveling at the speed of the internet, to everywhere. Agent Connolly was a compact woman in her mid-40s who moved through the Halverson site like someone who had been running toward this particular moment for 2 years and was not going to waste a single second of it now that she'd arrived. She had agents on every exit before her SUV fully stopped. She had Langford in federal custody and read his rights before he'd managed to compose his face back into something that resembled its usual confidence. She had the drive from Marlowe's hand logged into evidence, photographed and documented within 12 minutes of walking through the door. She was good at her job. She pulled Cal aside while her team worked the room. You understand I have about 40 questions, she said. Ask them, Cal said. The stream, she said. 80,000 viewers when I walked in here. It's at 400,000 now. It'll be everywhere by sunrise. She studied him. She did that herself. She did everything herself, Cal said. I just drove. Connolly looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone deciding how much of what she's being told is literally true. Briggs, she said, my people picked him up 20 minutes ago. He's already talking, hasn't stopped. She paused. He confirmed the fire. Both of them. The words landed on Cal the way he'd expected them to land, like something structural giving way. Not a surprise. He'd known it since Briggs said I followed orders in the dark of the compound. But confirmation was different from suspicion. Confirmation was a door closing permanently on the one remaining room where maybe it had been different. Maybe it had been an accident. Maybe the universe hadn't been that deliberately cruel. It had been that deliberately cruel, Thorne Connolly said. Her voice had shifted slightly. Still professional but human. I'm sorry. Cal nodded once. Will it be enough, he asked, to hold him, to keep him from walking out of this on a technicality in 6 months? With Briggs's testimony, the recording, the dash cam footage, Finn's hacked emails, the financial records, and 400,000 people who watched him describe ordering arson on camera, Connolly allowed herself the smallest possible version of a smile. Yeah, she said, it's going to be enough. Marlowe found Finn in the back of one of the federal vehicles with a blanket around his shoulders and Torres sitting beside him. And when Finn saw her come around the side of the vehicle, he was out and moving before she could say his name. He hit her hard enough that she took a step back and she wrapped both arms around him and held on. And neither of them said anything for a long time because there wasn't anything that needed saying that the holding didn't already cover. When he pulled back, his eyes were red, but his voice was steady. I talked to Torres, he said. I told them everything. All of it. I know, she said. You did good. I found Dad's recording on the drive before Torres took it, Finn said. I listened to it. He looked at her. Something behind his eyes that was older than 16. Older than either of them had earned the right to be. He tried to protect us. Yeah, Marlowe said. It still ended up here. Yeah, she said again. Finn looked at the site, at the federal agents moving, at the vehicles, at Victor Langford being walked toward a federal transport and zip ties that were considerably more official than the ones that had been on Marlowe's wrists an hour ago. Is it over, Finn said. Marlowe looked at Langford, at his posture, still upright, still trying for dignity, but diminished in some way that went deeper than the handcuffs. The specific diminishment of a man whose story has finally been told by someone other than him. This part, as she said, what happened over the following weeks moved faster than anyone who hadn't watched a federal financial crimes case collapse an empire in real time would expect. Connolly's team had been building toward this for 2 years. They had the architecture already in place. What Gideon Ashford's documentation gave them was not the beginning of the case, but the keystone. The piece that locked everything else into coherence. The offshore accounts, the bribery payments, the land fraud, the arson orders. Briggs filled in the operational details with the thorough cooperation of a man who had decided that his only remaining asset was his willingness to talk. The county commissioner resigned on a Thursday. The state senator's office announced he would not seek re-election on the following Monday. The federal judge who appeared in Gideon Ashford's notes was placed under investigation within the month. Each headline landed differently for Marlowe than she expected. She'd imagined that watching Langford's empire dismantle piece by piece would feel like victory, clean and definitive, the kind of resolution that the situation deserved. What it actually felt like was quieter than that, more complicated, like the difference between a wound closing and a wound healing, which are not the same process and do not happen on the same timeline. She was sitting at the diner counter back working because the bills did not pause for criminal prosecutions when the door opened and Preston Langford walked in. She saw him before he saw her, which gave her approximately 3 seconds to decide what her face was going to do when he looked up and they made eye contact. She used those 3 seconds. She put her face in neutral and let him come to her. He looked terrible, which she registered without satisfaction. Not the rough night terrible of 2 weeks ago. Something more sustained. The look of a person who has been sleeping badly for reasons that live inside them rather than outside. He stopped at the counter. "I know you don't want to see me," he said. "I don't know what I want yet," Marlo said, which was honest. "Sit down." He sat. She poured him a coffee without asking, because she was a waitress and it was automatic. And he looked at the cup with something that might have been gratitude or might have been shame or was probably both. "I called Connolly's office 2 days after the compound," he said. He wrapped his hands around the cup. "My mother showed up the morning after the compound. First time I'd seen her in 5 years. She left when I was 18, divorced my father, took nothing, just walked away." He looked up at Marlo. "She told me why. She said she found out what he'd been doing, the fires, the intimidation. She said she tried to stop him, and he told her if she ever spoke about it, she'd disappear like the others. So she left me." His voice cracked slightly. "She left me with him because she thought that was safer for me than trying to take me. She's been living in Oregon, working at a library, and she came back because she saw the video, saw what I did to you, and she said," he stopped, breathed. "She said you can choose differently than your father, but you have to choose now. So I called the FBI. I gave them our home address, told them where to find his personal files, his real records, the ones he kept at the house. And then I called my mother, and I told her I chose her." Preston looked down at his coffee. "I'm testifying against him. At the trial, Connolly asked me to. I said yes." Marlo went still. She looked at him. She thought about Connolly arriving with 4 vehicles, moving with a specificity and speed that had seemed, even in the chaos of the moment, slightly faster than Torres's call alone should have produced. "You called them," she said. "Yeah. Why?" He looked at the counter, at his coffee, at the space between his hands. "Because I watched what I did to you in here," Preston said. "And I laughed. And then I watched myself laughing on a security camera on the internet. And I tried to tell myself it wasn't that bad, and I couldn't." He looked up. "And then I found out what he'd been doing for 30 years, and I understood that I'd been that. I grew up inside that, and I thought it was normal. I thought that's just how things worked. People with money, people without money, and the space between them." His jaw tightened. "I was wrong." Marlo looked at him for a long time. You're going to spend a long time figuring out how wrong," she said. "And I'm not the person who gets to tell you how to do that." "I know. But you did the right thing," she said. "When it mattered. That counts." He nodded, picked up his coffee, set it down again. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't come close. But I am." Marlo looked at him the way she looked at the room the night it all started. Steady, clear, not flinching. "I believe you," she said, which was not the same as absolution. Both of them understood that. But it was true, which was worth more than anything false and warm would have been. He left 20 minutes later, and Marlo stood behind the counter and watched him go, and felt the particular complexity of a person who has learned that the world is not divided cleanly into people who harm and people who don't, but into people who harm and then run from it, and people who harm and eventually turn around. She refilled the coffee at table 3 and kept moving. The garage compound changed in the months that followed. Not physically, it was still the Iron Vulture's place, still 40 miles east of Ely on the road that didn't appear on most maps. But what happened inside it changed. What it was for changed. Priest put together the paperwork for a nonprofit, legitimately, with a lawyer, with filing fees and a board of directors and a name, Vulture's Watch, Community Protection Services. Carla ran the intake program. which helped women leaving dangerous situations find temporary housing resources and the specific kind of practical assistance that comes from people who have no bureaucratic overhead and no patience for waiting. Torres helped them connect with the FBI's Victim Services Network, which gave them reach that the club alone couldn't have had. The veterans came on their own, the way they always had, because word spreads differently in that community than in others. Not through advertising, but through the specific trust of one man telling another man that this is a place where they won't be handled. Within 3 months, there were 7 of them at the Thursday evening cookout. Within 6, there were 14. Hatch's collarbone healed. He complained about the physical therapy constantly and did every session without missing one, which everyone pretended not to notice. Cole testified at his federal hearing. He received a reduced sentence for full cooperation and spent 8 months in county and 3 years of probation. And when he came back, the garage was not the same as it had been when he left it. Not because of what he'd done, but because of what had happened since. Deacon told him that he had 2 options: earn it back or don't come back. Cole stayed. He earned it slowly, without anyone making a speech about it. Marlo started nursing school in January. She was 25 by then. The youngest person in her prerequisites class was 22, and the oldest was 51. A retired teacher named Donna who wanted something new. And on the first day, Marlo sat next to Donna because Donna had arrived early and chosen a seat near the window and smiled at Marlo when she came in. And that was enough. Finn's medication was covered now, not by tip money and double shifts, but by a victim compensation fund tied to the federal case. One of the outcomes nobody had specifically anticipated, but which Connolly's office had quietly made possible. He was a junior in high school. He had joined the debate team, which nobody saw coming except Marlo, who had watched her brother argue with authorities since he was 9, and thought obviously. She called Cal on a Tuesday evening in March. "How's the school?" he asked. "Hard," she said. "Good hard. The kind where you go home tired because you learned something, not because you survived something." "That's the best kind," he said. "How's the garage full?" he said. She could hear something in his voice that she hadn't heard in the early days. Not happiness exactly. Cal was not a man built for uncomplicated happiness. Something more sustainable than that. Something that had settled into him the way things settle when they find the right level. Priest is talking about expanding the intake program. Carla already has 12 women on the waiting list for housing support. Bull got a dog. Bull got a dog. Enormous animal. Has no idea what to do with it. It sleeps on his feet. Marlo laughed. An actual laugh. The kind that had surprised her a little when it came out. "I'm coming out Saturday," she said. "I have something for you." A pause. "You don't have to drive all the way out here." "I know I don't have to," she said. "I want to." She found him on Saturday evening where she somehow knew she'd find him. Outside the garage, sitting on an old wooden chair, watching the desert sky go through its colors as the sun went down. The Nevada desert at sunset was not subtle about it. It committed. She sat down in the chair Carla had already put beside his because Carla anticipated things, and she put the envelope on her knee and didn't hand it to him right away. They sat in the quiet for a while. "Torres heard from Connolly last week," Marlo said. "Langford's legal team is trying to negotiate a plea." She said no, she's going to trial, Good Cal said. Briggs is confirmed as the primary witness for the prosecution. She said his testimony is solid, the kind that doesn't shake under cross-examination because people who've been carrying guilt for 7 years tend to know every detail by heart. Cal nodded. His eyes were on the horizon. "I got the final forensic report," Marlo said, "about my father, the accident reconstruction team." She stopped, took a breath, let it out. They confirmed it wasn't an accident. The vehicle that hit him was a deliberate strike. They have the model from paint transfer evidence. And Briggs confirmed the rest. She looked at her hands. "So now I know." "Does it help?" Cal asked quietly, genuinely. "I don't know yet," she said. "Ask me in a year." He nodded. She picked up the envelope. I talked to the detective who handled your family's case, she said. He's cooperating with the federal investigation now. He confirmed that photos from the original scene were preserved in the evidence archive. She held the envelope out. I requested copies. I thought you should have them. Cal looked at the envelope. He didn't reach for it right away. A man preparing himself for something. Then he took it. He opened it slowly, slid out the photograph inside. It was a photograph of two people, a woman with dark hair and a laugh that came through even in a still image, and a small girl of about 5 or 6 sitting on the woman's lap with her arms around her mother's neck. Both of them caught in the middle of something joyful. The specific unguarded joy of people who don't know they're being photographed and are just happy in the moment they're in. Cal held the photograph with both hands. Marlo watched him and didn't look away because looking away would have been the smaller thing. His hands were steady. His face was not entirely. Something moved through it that had been waiting a very long time to move. Not released, not resolved, but acknowledged. Held without hiding. The difference between a man who has been refusing to grieve and a man who has finally given himself permission. She was good, he said. His voice barely made it out. She was the best person I ever knew. I know, Marlo said. My father's notes, the things he wrote about her work, about what she was trying to do. He admired her. He was scared. And he didn't go public the way she did, and he lived with that. And I think part of why he kept everything so carefully was because of her. Because she had been willing to go all the way, and he hadn't. And he couldn't undo that, but he could keep what she found alive. Cal was quiet for a long time. She would have liked you, he said. I think I would have liked her too, Marlo said. The desert finished its sunset in the particular way it did. All at once. The colors going from extravagant to deep. The dark coming in from the east, while the west still held the last light. Somewhere inside the garage, someone started the grill, and the smell of it drifted out. Voices carried, Priest's low rumble, Finn's voice, which he'd arrived with an hour ago, and promptly disappeared into a conversation with the veterans that Marlo could hear, was about something she didn't fully follow, but that Finn was clearly engaged with at full capacity. Hatch was telling a story at full volume. It was probably the same story he'd been telling since 1987, but everyone listened like it was new. Cal set the photograph carefully on his knee. You gave me my family back, he said. Marlo looked at him. At the photograph, at the garage behind them full of light and noise, and the specific kind of life that gets built not from luck or ease, but from people deciding deliberately to show up for each other day after day in the ordinary and the impossible. She shook her head. No, she said. You gave all of us one. From inside, Finn called her name. Something about the food, something about hurry up, something in the voice of a 16-year-old boy who was also, she knew, checking that she was there the way he would probably keep checking for a long time. And she would keep answering. She stood up. Cal stayed in his chair with the photograph and the sound of the people around him filling the desert evening. And on his face was something that had not been there 7 years ago when the fire took everything. Something that had not been there 2 weeks ago when he walked into a roadside diner for a cup of coffee and sat in the corner and watched a room choose silence. It was not peace exactly. It was better than peace. It was purpose that had found its people. And as the motorcycle sat still for one evening and the desert held everything close and the stars came out over Highway 50 one by one, Callahan Thorne, former soldier, former ghost man who had spent 7 years running from a grief he could not outpace, finally understood what he had found in the wreckage of someone else's worst night. Not redemption, not rescue, a reason. And a reason, it turns out, is the one thing powerful enough to make a person stop running and finally completely come home. The stars were out now, full desert night, the kind of dark that makes the light inside mean something. Marlo walked back into the garage. Finn grabbed her hand without thinking, 12 years old in that gesture. She let him. They ate. They told stories. Hatch told the one about the thing that happened in Kandahar, In 2009 that nobody believed but everyone had heard 6 times. Carla served pie. Bull's dog, a mastiff named Tiny, because of course it was begged shamelessly at every table. And sometime around 10 when the fire was burning low and people were starting to think about the ride home, Marlo found herself standing next to Cal one more time. You know what the best part is, she said. Cal looked at her. I'm not afraid anymore, Marlo said. For the first time in 7 years, maybe longer. I'm not afraid of what comes next. She looked at the compound, at Finn laughing at something Priest said, at Carla refilling coffee, at all of it. Dad spent 7 years scared. I spent 7 years not knowing what to do with what he left me. But now you finished it, Cal said. Now I know what brave looks like, Marlo said. It looks like doing the thing that scares you because it's the right thing, not because you're not afraid, but because you are and you do it anyway. She looked at him. Thank you for showing me that. Cal shook his head. I didn't show you anything. You already knew. You just needed a reason to remember. The night stretched out. The desert held them. And somewhere far away in a federal detention center in Las Vegas, Victor Langford sat in a cell and understood for the first time that the thing he'd built over 30 years could be undone in 30 days by a 24-year-old waitress with her father's notebook and the courage he never had. Justice doesn't always come fast, but when it comes, it's absolute. And in a diner 40 miles outside Ely, Nevada on Highway 50, where none of this was supposed to matter, it mattered. It mattered because one man put down a coffee cup. It mattered because one woman said we don't run. It mattered because 40 people did nothing and the 41st person did everything. If this story reached you, if it meant something, leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me your story, because this one isn't just about Marlo and Cal. It's about every person who ever had to decide, do I stay silent or do I speak? Do I run or do I stand? Do I let them win or do I finish what someone braver started? The answer, it turns out, is always the same. You stand, you speak, you finish it, based on the true stories of those who refuse to stay silent.